Good afternoon, everyone. We continue our study in the book of Numbers, and we are in chapter 26 today. And chapter 26 carries on from where we left off last week, and we had a couple of chapters with regards to that episode with Balaam, right, or Bilam, and it ended horribly and horribly for the Israelites who were encamped on the shores of the Jordan, on the plains of Moab. And it is interesting to note that when it comes to chapter 26, uh, we continue to see this. Uh, and it came to pass after the plague that the Lord spoke to Moses and Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, saying, Now, this is where we need to pay attention to why it is a continuation. This happened after the plague. And what is the plague? The, the meaning of plague, you could actually look at this as God striking at Israel. Uh, it is a slaughter. I think you can use that word for it too. Because the word plague, unfortunately, in our modern sense, speaks about, say, a kind of a virus. But in the Bible, whenever we read the word plague, it doesn't necessarily have a connotation to an illness or a bacteria or a virus and that would kill certain people. It's not like the that at all. This concept of a plague in the Bible, although it is translated as plague or pestilence, is really carrying a connotation that God is striking at a group of people. For example, in the days of Egypt, we read about the events called the 10 plagues of Egypt. But the reason that it's called the 10 plagues is not that God sent viruses to them, but God gave 10 blows. God struck at Egypt 10 times. And that is the concept of a plague. It is really not sending illness or a pestilence of a modern concept. And so in this case, God struck the Israelites. Now, let me just scroll back and I'll show you how this refers to chapter 25. Now, in chapter 25, which we did last week, we talked about how they had relations with the women of Moab. First, there were two incidences, and then they sacrificed to their gods, bowed down to their gods, and the anger of the Lord was aroused against Israel. Now, when God struck at Israel, it's called a plague. So, what was it that God struck Israel? Now, if you read verse 5, it says, Every one of you kill his men who were joined to Baal of Peor. And in this case, you find that people died. Many of them died. The second part was this. On that day, you find another instance where one of the children of Israel came to present a Midianite woman in the sight of Moses, and thereby you find uh, uh, Pinchas, the son of Eleazar, killed him with a javelin or a spear, right? And then it says the plague was stopped among the children of Israel, and there were 24,000 who who died in the plague. That is the plague. God struck and there was judgment that came upon it. So the plague is perhaps another word of saying the judgment of God came upon the people. And with this, we can say that this was the plague. And after all these people died, the Lord spoke to Moses and Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest. What did God ask to do? He says, take a census, right? Take a census. The word take a census literally means lift up the heads. That is a different way of looking at things, isn't it? Lift the heads. So in this case, they are counting the heads of everyone in the congregation of the children of Israel. And as in Numbers chapter 1, they are counting 20-year-old and above. It is a very specific group of people, and these were also men of war. And these are the ones who are able to go to war in Israel. So 20-year-old and above, they are actually the sons of Israel. Now, the English translation likes to, well, I guess, generalize the word sons to children so that it include both men and women of Israel. But oftentimes it doesn't carry that connotation. In this case, it really only means sons, no daughters. Daughters are never counted at all. Why? Because there is a specific purpose, right? One, go to war, always men. But in this particular chapter, this would be a description of the distribution of the inheritance of the land. And thereby the lineage of the men would matter, not the women. Now, as we continue, so Moses and Eleazar spoke to them in the plains of Moab by the Jordan. And this word across from is a good word, right? It's a good word. Across from Jericho. It is not on the side or the western side of the Jordan, but it is really virtually, if you look west, you would come to Jericho, and on a good day, you can actually see Jericho. And so it says, take a census of the people from 20-year-old and above, as the Lord commanded Moses and the, again here, sons of Israel who came out of the land of Egypt. Now, understand that the sons of Israel who came out of Egypt were at that time 20-year-old and above, and below, including little children. Now, this is important for us for one purpose. These 20-year-old and above, at the time they came out from the land of Egypt, would be dying in the wilderness. What would matter would be those below 20-year-old at the time they came out of the land of Egypt, as well as those who were born in the wilderness would be the ones being taken off a census right now. Now, as we go through this lengthy chapter of approximately 65 verses, and although we are in verse 5 right now, I just want to give a brief recollection. When we first started the book of Numbers, the first thing that happened in the book of Numbers really is to take a census. And it would be in the second year after they came out of Egypt. And so when it came out of Egypt, it was the Passover, and then it was the springtime. It was the first of the month of Aviv or Nisan. And then 1 year would have passed by, and then they took a census. Now, in chapter 12 of the book of Exodus, they did not do a census. Now, you need to understand, census is a very sensitive matter to God. And census by counting heads is an absolute no-no unless God says so. Counting heads by kings would be viewed as the king dependent on numbers themselves and not trust in God. The confidence is placed in numbers and not confidence in the power of God. And that's why census by counting heads is an absolute prohibition unless God says so. And in chapter 1 of the book of Numbers, they did that just to make sure that all those who came out of Egypt had a count. In Exodus chapter 12, it was 600,000 thereabouts, right? 600,000 thereabouts. They didn't count anymore, and these are 20-year-old and above. In Numbers chapter 1, they counted and we have a number. And today in chapter 26, it would be the 40th year, and we are going to count again, and there will be a number. Now, the reason why we're not going to focus too detail on chapter 26 is because there are a lot of discussions about family and family names and who is where. These names would mean something if we were Israelites, that we can actually look back and say, oh, yes, that was our forefather that was mentioned in chapter 26 that made it into the promised land. But we are not Israelites, we're not Jews. So we are going to look at this purely from an observer viewpoint. And so we wouldn't be spending too much time on this chapter, but we want to look at the numbers. That's why it's called Numbers. 2 census were taken, one in chapter 1, one in chapter 26, and we will put the two together to see what are the differences between the two. And in chapter 26, the plague was already over and many people died. People in the wilderness, people who died in Korah's time, people who died when the snake bit them, people who died when God opened up the ground, people who died at Mount Sinai when they worshiped the golden calf. Many occasions people died. And now in chapter 26, it is God who says count. And so when God says count, then you count. And that's what Moses and Eleazar did. Now, Aaron by this time had died. Miriam have died. And so the one who took over from Aaron was his third son, Eleazar. In chapter 25, we read about Pinchas, and he was one of the, I would say, the grandson, right? The grandson of Aaron. Eleazar is the third son of Aaron, and he was the priest himself. And so now let's read from verse 5 all the way down, and then we will spend a little bit of time at the end to correlate with Numbers chapter 1 and Numbers chapter 3. One thing I would also want to comment is that the way that the numbers were calculated in chapter 26 is exactly the same way it was counted in chapter 1. And the order of how it was counted is also identical to chapter 1. So the way the narrative works is really the same. And it starts with Reuven and it ends with the well, I would say it ends with the last tribe. That would be Naphtali, right? With Naphtali. And so now it says Reuven was the firstborn of Israel, of Jacob, basically. So whenever we say of Israel, this literally would mean Jacob. And the children of Reuben were Hanok, Palu, Hezron, Carmi, and they were numbered. And so what we are interested is the numbers, 43,730. Now let's spend just a little bit of time to explain this set of words in verse 7. It says here, the numbering was, this is Shalosha, right? Shalosha. Shalosha literally means 3, right? 3. Shalosha. And 40. 40 is Arba'im. So we have 43, right? 43. And then we have the word Elef, 1,000. So 43,000 is clear. Now, there is a challenge in the name, in the word Elef, right? Elef. Aleph is the same way we spell Aleph, except that the pronunciation is an A instead of an A. And then 700. So we have 7, and then we have 100, and then we have 30. Now, the general argument by people who do not believe in the Bible is this: that in the times of Exodus chapter 12, when the Israelites came out of Egypt, it was stated that it was approximately 600,000 odd men who were 20 years and above. And the word 1,000 was in contention, that unit doesn't necessarily mean 1,000, right? And I think that because the Bible had at least 2 census and 3 600,000 type of numbers, and when you actually sit down and take Exodus chapter 12, Numbers chapter 1, Numbers chapter 26, and you work all these numbers and say, well, instead of 1,000, you could say it's a unit, right? 43 unit, 730. So what is unit? It has no meaning unless you say it's 43,000. So it's 43 of something that is bigger than 100, really. Because when we come to the end after Naphtali, we have a summation. And the Bible has given us all sorts of numbers, and these numbers are what we are going to pay attention to, and we can add them up, and we can get a proper summation even by 21st century allocation. And so in our Bibles, we have the word thousands that is translated for Aleph. And it cannot represent anything else except Aleph. And that is why that a lot of people, when they say there is no way that when Jacob went into Egypt with 70 people or 70 souls or 70 nephesh, and when in Exodus chapter 12, out came 600,000 men or who are 20-year-old and above, seems too great a number. Many people had problems like that. Now, when it comes to Numbers chapter 1 and Numbers 26, right here, you find that the way that the number units are referring to Aleph is very consistent. And so when we assume Aleph to be 1,000 because it is bigger than 100, we are able to do summation. And so let's carry on. Verse 7, in Reuven, 43,730. Then came a sidebar, I would say, and then it talks about Datan and Aviram, which we read earlier on, in the company of Korah, and they were all destroyed. The earth opened its mouth, swallowed them up together with Korah. When that company died, fire devoured 250 men, and they became a sign. Now, this is a repeat of that particular event, right? That particular event. And that event is important for us to realize because the word sign is visible. It is a visible memorial that everyone saw fire coming down from the heavens, and they all saw the land open up its mouth and swallowed them. And so they became a sign. That incident is something that they will talk about for the rest of their lives throughout the generations. The reason why this was stated was because the children of Korah did not die. This is important. The children of Korah did not die. Korah died because he wanted to be the high priest. But God had other plans. So after we discussed with Korah, thereby the census count continues. So you notice the narrative of the census was that there will be some a sidebar. You know, every now you count, something comes in and tells us a little bit of the background. The next tribe that was counted are the sons of Simeon. And with the Simeon, you can talk about Nemuel, Yamin, Yachin, the Zerah, Shaul. And the Simonides were 22,200. Same problem with the Aleph, but when you count it as 1,000, it all works. Third count was God. We have the family, and to count them, 40,500. From verse 19, it gives us some background. The sons of Judah were and Onan. These were the first and second son. The firstborn and the second son both died in the land of Canaan before they even went to Egypt. And the other son that was counted were Shelah, in particular Perez, right, and Zerah. And these were sons through the widow of by the name of Tamar, in a very strange story in Genesis chapter 38. And Perez, it's the primary focus from there on, which we would get Ruth story in the book of Ruth and Boaz, and to David. And so now we see that the family of Judah were 76,500. We talk about Issachar. Issachar would be 64,300. Now, there are a number of verses in between, and they discuss the families. Again, I mentioned this to you because we are not looking through all these names because we are not Israelites, and they would not be of any interest to us from our viewpoint. We are only interested to make sure the numbers itself mean something because they are a means of showing that God is truthful in everything he has said. Verse 26 talks about the sons of Zebulun, 60,500. The sons of Joseph is split into two, right? Split into two. And we find that this split is by Manasseh and Ephraim. And thereby Joseph is split into two parts. The reason why Joseph was split in two parts, we've covered this in Numbers chapter 1, is that the Levites are counted separately and is not counted in the number of men who went to war. The Levites did go to war, but they were not counted as a number because the Levites would be the one who would blow the shofar, give the signal, carry the ark. But more importantly, the tribe of Levi doesn't have a share in the inheritance of the land, and that's why they were counted separately. And yet God still wants 12 parcels of land for 12 tribes. And to get 12, when you take Levi out, would be for the use of Manasseh and Ephraim. And this was actually done in Genesis chapter 48 and 49. And so we have the sons of Manasseh. The sons of Manasseh would be 52,700. The sons of Ephraim would be 32,500, and these were the sons of Joseph or Joseph. Right? This is important for us to follow. Now, it's also important that we continue on with the other son, which is Benjamin. With the son of Benjamin, a lot of information of the other family members, but the important thing that we are paying attention today is 45,600. After Benjamin, it comes to Dan. Dan would be 64,400. Next comes Asher. Asher would be 53,400. Next would be Naphtali. That would be the last of the tribe, and that would be 45,400. With this, we have a general summation of the 12 tribes to be 601,730. The purpose of this numbering now, they have numbered it in in Numbers chapter 1, and now in Numbers chapter 26. Reading from verse 52 now tells us the purpose this time round. 52, God says to Moses, saying, to these are the 601,730, 601,730. They do not include women. They do not include children that is below the age of 20. These will be only the ones that is above 20. Way above, right? Now, I guess they never counted anyone who was like very old, but the reason why they didn't count very old is because there aren't many people that were very old. Because those who were very old that came out of Egypt had already died in the wilderness. The oldest among them is Moses. The rest of that first generation that came out had died in the wilderness. Now it says that the land shall be divided as an inheritance according to the number of names. And this is important. Let us break this down. The idea of divided means a lot, a portion. It's like cake, right? You have to cut out the cake. If there are 10 people, then you have got to cut the cake into 10 portions. That's the meaning of divide. The next meaning here is inheritance. Inheritance means a share, a portion. It also means a possession that they can own. Now, this concept of owning, I think we need to be a bit clearer. So let me explain. We always say that, well, God gave the promised land to the Israelites. we need to remember that this concept of giving and owning and possessing is really not our English word at all. What do I mean by that? When the Bible says that God gave the land to the Israelites and the Israelites is now inheriting it as an inheritance, they can possess the land, it literally means that the Israelites can now come into the land. They have a boundary dividing each parcel of land, and each of them within the tribe is also allocated or divided into pieces their land as by family. And each of the family is able to take that land to pass it down to the next generation and the generation after next. Now, this appears to be, yeah, that is an inheritance. Well, it only appears as an inheritance from a visible viewpoint, from a practice viewpoint. But in absolute terms, the real ownership of the land really belongs to God. God has just temporarily assigned it to Israel. And so when we say God gave the land to Israel, God didn't sign over the title deed as we would in today's terms, right? When you sell a piece of property or a house, you have to sign a sales and purchase agreement, and then you've got to go to the land office to change the title of the land to the buyer. And thereby the title changes over, and then the original owner, which is you, do not have any rights to the land any longer. That is not the case in this concept of God giving the land to the Israelites. God didn't sign over the title deed. God gave them so that they appear to be able to pass down the land to the next generation. But later, when we come to the book of Deuteronomy, particularly in chapter 28, there are warnings and curses of how they can use the land with blessings and curses, of which the final curse, God will punish them and take them away from the land, that they can be kicked out of the land, which belongs to them. So you can see the fact that there is no absolute title deed change in today's concept. God gave them the right to use the land if they remain obedient to God. Now, I have always stated this, and I would state this again, this little mantra. I say it this way, right? God's land, God's rules. And this applies very clearly throughout the Bible. God never signed over the land to the Israelites. It remains as God's land, and God can do anything to it. And so God will punish the Israelites if they refuse to obey God and refuse to comply to the conditions that God has given to them so that they have good use of the land. And so God's rules is imposed, right? Are imposed upon the Israelites as a condition of being in the land. And they are to remember this. Now, coming back to chapter 26, verse 53, it is also about the land. And so let me just say one more thing, that the counting of the heads is to apportion the land, God's land, so that they can actually take possession. Now, verse 54 requires us to understand it a little clearer. 54 to 56, actually. So think of it this way: to a large tribe, you shall give a larger inheritance. To a small tribe, you shall give a smaller inheritance. Each shall be given its inheritance according to those who were numbered of them. Understand this. What is important here is that God is a just God. If you have many people in the tribe, you would get a bigger piece of land. If you have a fewer number of people, you get a smaller piece of land. That's what it means, according to the number of heads. Now, the second part is this: but the land shall be divided by lot. They shall inherit according to the names of the tribes of their fathers. According to the lot of their inheritance shall be divided between the larger and the smaller. Now, this is something which we need to understand. When you look at this text, first, God says they must be given according to the number that of the tribes, and that would be a fair way. If you have 10 people, you will get 10 pieces of the cake. If you have 2 persons, you get 2 pieces of the cake. All of them would be fair and square. And God is a just God. But then it comes to the idea of lot. Then you need to understand Eleazar as a high priest, and in his tunic, right? In his high priest tunic, he has 2 little stones called the Umim and the Tumim. And these are the divine stones that the high priest would use to seek God's decisions. And so this divided by lot is also to be using the Umim and Tumim, that God will have a say by divine means. And so they shall inherit according to the names of the tribes of their fathers, and according to the lot of their inheritance shall be divided, the larger and the smaller. And so there are 2 lots to be done. One is the tribe, and one is the size. That is what it means by the lot here. First, they draw up the piece, the name of the tribe, and then they draw up the lot of where that tribe would inherit the land. And by divine activity, using the Umim and Tumim, God will give according to the number of the people in this particular census. That is a very clear explanation from this text. Verse 57. So very quickly, we will go through this. Then the number of Levites, according to the 3 sons of Levi, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari, they are counted. Now, we are also told, sidebar, right? Side information, that Kohath begot Amram. Amram's wife was Yocheved, the daughter of Levi, born in Egypt, and to Amram, in that marriage, bore Aaron, Moses, and Miriam, right? And to Aaron were born Nadav, Abihu, both who died in the fire before God. And notice this particular incident, Nadav, Abihu offered profane fire before the Lord, and they died, has always been repeated. And right now we're talking about Eleazar and Itmar, and the remaining 2 sons of Aaron. Verse 62. Now, those who were numbered of them were 23,000, every male from a month old and above. And this would match with Numbers chapter 3, because the counting of the Levi is male from a month old and above to serve God. And they were not numbered for other children of Israel because there was no inheritance given to them among the sons of Israel. Always remember the word children here is sons. Sons, right? Very specific. And so the Levites had no share in the inheritance. Verse 63, those who were numbered by Moses and Eleazar, or the priests, who numbered the children of Israel. Again, remember, these are sons of Israel. In the plains of Moab, across the Jordan, by the Jordan on the eastern side, across from Jericho. Jericho would be across. So if you recall, if this was the Jordan, and then you have the Dead Sea. So let me use blue here, I think easier. And then we have the Dead Sea. This is the Jordan River. So the area that we're talking about is right here, the plains of Moab. And then Jericho is found right here. And so this would be across, right? Across the Jordan. Okay. So let's wrap this up and I'll do the comparison. So among these were not a man, meaning they counted every head of those who were numbered by Moses and Aaron the priest when they numbered the children of Israel in the wilderness of Sinai. This would be in Numbers chapter 1 and 3 for the Levites. In chapter 26 is Moses and Eleazar. But after chapter 1, the Lord had said of them, they shall surely die in the wilderness because they were not willing to go into the promised land. And there was not a man left of them except Caleb and Joshua or Yehoshua, the son of Nun, of which they were the ones who gave a good report. Right? This would be in Numbers chapter 13. And later on, both Caleb and Joshua would be given some property directly, and they inherited this. All right. Now, let me just swing over to one slide and we will end with that, which is a comparison with Numbers chapter 1. In this particular slide, you would see Numbers chapter 1, which was done actually in the second year after they had come out of the land of Egypt. What we covered just now was in the 40th year of the wilderness wandering at the plains of Moab. And this would be in Numbers 26. Now, you have to trust me for it because I put this down and you can go back and check. And there are references for chapter 1 and chapter 26. What would be interesting to observe is that at the end of the day, chapter 1, verse 46 and chapter 26, verse 51 gave us the summation and it actually adds up accurately. And then in Numbers chapter 3 gave us 22,273. And in Numbers chapter 26, verse 62 gave us 23,000. On this particular side, right here, I had shown you whether the tribe increased in number or reduced in number. So there are tribes that increase and there are tribes who decrease. There is not a single tribe that remained the same, which tells us that God readjusted all these numbers by the way how many people died and how many people were born. And we find that Reuben reduced a couple of thousand. Simeon reduced a lot, right? This would be a lot of thousands, many thousands. Simeon really had it coming for them. Then we find God had reduced a few thousand. Judah had actually, well, I wouldn't say Judah had increased, sorry. Judah actually decreased. What was I thinking, right? Judah had actually decreased by a small number, Judah actually increased, right? Actually increased. The next one would be Issachar. It went up a lot, right? About 10,000. Zebulun, a few thousand. Manasseh, quite a number. And that's why they got a bigger parcel of land. Ephraim will get less for whatever purpose. You see things going up and down. Benjamin had actually increased fairly significantly. Dan also increased a little bit. Asher increased significantly. Naphtali reduced. And so overall, the numbers actually reduced a little bit, right? Almost about 2,000 number, almost 2,000. Number of Levi went up just by 27 people. Well, not 27, but 27 for males 1 month old and above. So the Levites is probably what you see as the smallest tribe, virtually almost the smallest tribe, until Simeon were reduced to this number. Now, what I wanted to show you is, can the word Aleph mean anything other than 1,000? And the answer is no. It doesn't matter how you cut the numbers and how you move the meaning around, but Aleph cannot mean anything but 1,000, because we have 100, and the next number has to be 1,000, because that's how every nation count things. And so if we can accept that Aleph is 1,000 in the book of Exodus, in the book of Numbers, and everywhere else in the Bible, and so it would be 1,000, we find that these numbers will be correct. Now, let me just wrap it up by saying this. The census is a very important divine instruction. And it has to be divine because it cannot be by the kings. So it's really a divine, right? Divine instruction. And this instruction is very much for God to show that he wants to maintain about the same number of people to enter the promised land. When they came out of Egypt, there was 603. When they enter into the promised land, finally, it is still 601,700. So the number is very close to each other. Not exactly the same, but very close. This is to show the faithfulness of God. But the specific tribes would have changed depending on how they have given birth and depending on how faithful they were. And Simeon were the ones who had gotten the bulk of the problem, right? The bulk of the problem here, together with, I guess, with Ephraim that has reduced itself a little bit, and also with Naphtali. But fundamentally, Simeon, right? Simeon themselves. Now, all of these, one last point, is to show us that Simeon, that the number for the census were actually now in chapter 26 designed for the apportionment of the land. And that is how Israel continues to hand down the property from here on by the sons, never the daughters. And so they're all sons of Israel, not children of Israel. And so lineage is important because lineage gives possession of land. And so lineage is by the men, and by the men that would prove the right to the tribe, and never by the woman. And so this is the lesson that I hope to place into your minds, that lineage in the Bible is divine. Lineage in the Bible is to compute by the men, by the sons, from father to son, son to grandson, but never the daughters. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.